Will it go? The question is, will it go? Restream says it has it. Restream says it has it. Now, will YouTube get it? That's the question. Will YouTube get it? YouTube has it. YouTube has it.
We have... YouTube has us.
YouTube has us. They have us. They do.
Did you ever watch The Facts of Life?
No.
Oh, okay.
Whoa, hold on. Wow,
You're
that
too
was really
young.
loud. Sorry, everybody. All right. Let me hit
Bring up the
here.
chat.
Oh yeah, I gotta open that up. Where's my Discord?
I don't know.
Hit mute on that tab because all this time later, I still haven't muted the sounds properly.
It's not as easy as you think. All right, where are we? We're on the Gonna Geek Discord server. There we go. Well, I mean, there. Here. We are live with Better Podcasting 2302. You got to do the here, the at here, the at
I knew you were going
everyone,
to.
the at all.
All right, cool. We're back. The penultimate episode. Turn off my AC.
Of season 4. Oh,
That's okay. It's very smoky here. And not due to the usual Canadian smoky reasons. All right, let's do this. Should we do this?
Yeah, let's do this.
He says, Johnny says that video and audio sound very good. Sound very good.
Is that very good? Or is
So-
sound versus good?
I think it was sound virtual.
Is that
good.
like Batman versus Superman? Is that like the
Mm.
Martha moment? Should
It's-
that say Martha?
No, that makes sense because it's sound versus good, meaning that it's either we have better podcasting sound or it's good. They can't be the
It's
same
the
thing
Venn
happening.
diagram. Yeah, they can't meet.
All right, let's do this.
Mutually exclusive.
I'm Chris from Play Comics, a show where we look at video games based on comic properties and how well they stick to that comic book source material. A part of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and the opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other wonderfully geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
I just needed to check something here. Okay, cool. I wasn't sure how low my camera was. Didn't want to show that, Go ahead when you want.
I need brain bleach now.
Okay, fine.
Brain bleach.
I'm Chris from Play Comics, a show where we look at video games based on comic properties and how well they stick to that comic book source material. A part of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and the opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other wonderfully geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
Welcome to episode 302 of Better Podcasting. On this show, we complete our season 4 podcast media host reviews talking about Castos.
But first, in this week's Better Podnerings, topics include Spotify Q&A changes, an Overcast overhaul, and there's changes with Captivate. There's now 2.5 apparently.
And finally, in this week's Better Pod Back, we mentioned some Better Podcasting Discord server comments.
Lauren, start the penultimate season 4 episode now.
This is Better Podcasting. We are hobby podcasters through and through, just like you. That's why we are different. We minimize the money talk so that you can focus on building a better podcast.
Welcome to the penultimate season 4 episode of Better Podcasting. That's right, we've got one more of the season, and I am Steven, and I am pleased to say SP is here this week. Although I guess technically it's 2 if you include this one.
There's a lot going on this week. You got the Olympics starting. You got Deadpool versus Wolverine coming on, which means a return for me for a week over to Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. And we have the penultimate episode of season 4 of Better Podcasting. I am so excited about this. One, because I'm excited to talk about the service that we're going to review. And two, I'm excited that this is the last review that we're going to do in season 4.
Yeah, for those of you that aren't following, so with season 4, our media host themed season is coming to a close. And so this is the last media host review that we will do. Today we'll be talking about Castos, but next week we will have one more episode where we will sort of recap the season, talk a little bit about our personal decisions of where we decided to move from Libsyn to, and then we will end the season, and then we will have August off and a little bit of September, and then be back with a whole new season in September. And while you are processing all that information, you should process your How I Saved My Podcast story, because we haven't done a single one this season, I don't think. So we would love it if you had something go wrong with your podcast. Tell us, how did it go wrong? What did you do to fix it? And send us a story so that we can include that in a future episode of Better Podcasting.
I'm looking forward to hearing about everybody else. I mean, Stephen, you and I, we have weekly How I Save My Podcast stories, but we want to hear from other people.
And mostly this podcast is saved by you being on it and not just being me.
Just because I record a backup.
Let's go ahead and get into the Better Podnerings.
This week, we're going to talk about something that was announced a couple weeks ago, but this is the first time we have a chance to talk about it, and that's Spotify. They have changed their format of how they deal with interaction on their app and in the website. I believe at this point it was rolled out one and then the other. Maybe we're still waiting on the website. Anyway, they used to have an interaction for a Q&A. I never used it, but Stephen, as we use Spotify for our review in season 4 here, did you notice when you were uploading an episode and you were publishing an episode, there was this block that came up at the very end that said, what question did you want to ask your audience? You remember that?
No, I've blocked most of this season out.
Okay, well, I mean, as much beer as you Canadians actually consume, I can see how memory would be an issue. However, it was the case. Well, Spotify decided that it wanted to go away from that. They wanted to actually put in comments in there. I think that's because they want to be a little bit more YouTube-ish. That is my commentary. That is not anything that they said. So I think they want their experience kind of mirror the success of the experience over on YouTube. What they did is, like I said, they took away the Q&A and they replaced it with comments. Now, I haven't used Spotify since. Stephen, obviously you haven't either. I don't generally listen to my shows or consume my shows or watch my shows over on Spotify, so I haven't personally experienced this. However, I do know that they are a strong number 2 and in some cases vying for number 1 place to consume podcasts in 2024. So I think this is notable. It's notable to go check your episodes and check and see how much interaction you're having over there now that it's not just Q&A, but it's comments. So as an advice to hobby podcasters, including ourselves, Stephen, you and I, for our shows that we do, we should probably go over there and check just as much as we check the YouTube comments on a weekly basis, a few times a week, at least that's what I do. So I think that is warranted now with Spotify, given the fact of its consumer or the listening and the watching data over there in relation to the totality of podcast consumption.
I think that this is probably a smart decision and staying in line with what probably the average listener would expect when being on the platform. Comments are pretty universal at this point.
Yep. So let's move on to discussion point number 2, which is Overcast. Now, Stephen, I know you don't use Overcast because it's an iOS and you don't use iOS. You're on an Android. Now, I believe you're on either Pocket Cast or Beyond Pod, one of those two.
Yes, I'm on a few different apps, but generally, I find myself on Pocket Cast. Sorry, Damien.
Okay, so those are some Android apps, and there's more out there, of course.
Podcast
Over
Addict
on-
was the one I was saying sorry for to Damien.
Podcast Addict. Okay, over on iOS, there's several apps too, but a few years ago, Apple Podcasts kind of screwed up. They broke the app, and a lot of people jumped ship and they went to Overcast at the time. They're still kind of a small in the total consumption out there, but it is still one of the bigger non-Apple Podcast iOS apps to listen to podcasts. What happened over the years is the code got old. It couldn't be maintained very well, but the owner was looking at trying to sustain it. It is a one-person shop, right? It is not something that a whole company runs. It's just one person, Marco Arment. And then he decided to completely revamp the back end of Overcast, try to make the front end as equal as possible, but he did make some changes in the process. I got hit with this update when I downloaded, because I keep all my apps current. I downloaded the app and I was like, oh, this is the different experience, because I had heard about this through the emails and through the actual in-app notifications that they were going to move into the next generation or 2.0 of Overcast. And the one that has affected me the most is you cannot just click on an episode and stream it while it downloads. You have to wait for it to fully download before it will start playing. You might think, yeah, that's not that much big of a deal. You can set everything to automatically download, so when a new episode comes in, it will download. Well, you have to make sure that it's set to download on the 5G or, the non-Wi-Fi connections in order to get it downloaded. And if you don't, then as soon as you click on it, you have to wait for the whole file to download. It's not that big of a deal if you're living in a place with great Wi-Fi or great 5G. But if you're traveling, like I do, through parts of the world, in my case, the United States, that doesn't have that great 5G, and I will put a specific example because I do this drive several times a year in the middle of Wisconsin. I-94 in the middle of Wisconsin does not have 5G. So if I want to listen to a new podcast that had not downloaded as I'm driving through, I have to wait until I either, stop at McDonald's, which has Wi-Fi, or some place that has Wi-Fi, or I have to wait until I get back to 5G because it just simply won't download on my phone without 5G for some reason. So that is the one use case that I've run into that it doesn't work that great. However, on the good side, I'm glad that Marco has updated this. I'm glad that he's kind of future-proofed it by updating the back end and the coding so it can be updated, and that this app will be good probably for a few years in the future, and I don't have to worry about shifting my podcast listening off of Overcast to something else.
I find it interesting in the comments there, quote, most big podcasts now use dynamic ad insertion, which causes bugs and problems for streaming playback. Downloading episodes completely before they begin playback is much more reliable, end quote. So once again, it was the money that ruined it.
Money is just ruining podcasts for hobby podcasters. It has been that way for a while, and there's nothing we can do to change it. Money is entering into podcasts. It's been that way for a while. It has gone through a downturn because the adpocalypse, or whatever you want to call it, at the beginning of 2023, and has persisted into 2024 here. But hey, as hobby podcasters, I don't care. But it has side effects like this.
Which, that's a perfect segue. This episode was sponsored by SP's Blue Yeti Emporium. Come on by and buy yourself a Blue Yeti today.
I was wondering what you were going to use, because in the past you've used my used spaceship Emporium.
I figured that, you've got a soft spot for the Blue Yeti, so might as well bring that into this podcast.
I have a bigger car now that weighs more, that will crush it even better if I have one.
No, but seriously, I'm glad to see that this change is being made to Overcast. I don't use it, but I do know that you have talked a bit about the plight that you have faced with it.
Right. Okay, for the third discussion point that we're going to talk about in this podcast, Captivate 2.5. We were notified about this in our emails, or at least I was, because I'm on the Captivate email list now that we've had accounts there. We also had some interaction on our Discord server about that. So I actually went and took a look at this. They did update their UI, which I know Steven probably has some specific thoughts about it, or would if he would look at it, the back end, which we haven't done that. We haven't reviewed this. But the one thing that I'll say is the hang up that I had about Captivate to begin with that didn't meet our criteria was the downloads. They had limited the downloads, and both Steven and I do not believe that limited downloads is the way to go, and that's not how we want to be treated with a podcast media host service. So it doesn't change our review at all, because that was a sticking point and that wasn't changed. However, we do acknowledge that they have updated their UI and updated how you interact with Captivate. So that part of the review would obviously have to change if we did it again, but the basis of why they're not on our short list has not changed at all. My recommendation has not changed.
Yeah, I think that this is something that we might see a little more happening with other media hosts, because there does seem to be not just us in the market for shopping from for a new media host from one that we've been on for a long time. It seems like there's a lot of chatter in there right now about people shopping around, and so I think it's smart for media hosts like this to be looking and seeing where they can pull up their socks. And although we have not recreated an account to reevaluate, I am glad to see that this has happened. I think this is probably good for them.
They're not the only one. RSS, for instance, they redid a few things. About the time that we reviewed them, we know that Pinecast also changed some stuff earlier this year. So there seems to be a lot of refresh going on in 2024.
For sure. One thing that I thought was interesting, though, when I was looking at their notes, was they had a section talking about sub-networks.
Yes.
And they call it unprecedented network control. But the idea of sub-networks is something that I hadn't really thought about. But basically, you have, for shared podcasts, any general level, like they call it a top level network, and then you can split podcasts into more specific groups while keeping them in the same organization. So to me, it sounded like what was going to happen with that was you had the ability to basically have an overarching network, but then individually share different things based off of specific podcast needs. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that all works out, because the sub networks button is something that basically the term of the sub network is something that I hadn't really thought about before. And the examples that they gave in there, they have, for example, let me say that again. The idea of the sub-networks wasn't something I had thought about before, and the example they gave was sub-network Captivate Movies, and then within that they would have a review show and a superhero talk show. So it sounds like better management maybe of your podcast within there. And if you are somebody that has a lot of podcasts under your account, a lot of the things we've looked at to date, it's hard to keep organized because they're just a big list of your podcasts. And we've seen this ourselves as we've been doing some experimenting behind the scenes, sharing a bunch of podcasts. It's just a big list. So I think the idea of better organization, if that's what this is, makes a lot of sense, especially if you are somebody who is running or having a hand in running a lot of different podcasts.
I think it's important to note that we're really excited about any innovation that does not deal with advertisements.
Mm-hmm.
And this would be one of them. So I'm glad that the industry is still embracing non-ad driven improvements to the system. I mean, podcasting 2.0 is, there's crowdfunding and Bitcoin that's at the heart of it, but the namespace in totality is pretty cool when you think about the innovations that it's trying to bring to the podcast space. And it's good to see some of the infrastructure companies that are embracing different things or coming up with their own innovations. Buzzsprout came up with some, Captivate. So it has been pervasive throughout the industry. There are some old companies that are noticeably lacking in that, by the way, this year. Just pointing that out.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. So, what do you think about all of this? Let us know, because there's only one more episode for you to give us your feedback about this before the end of the season. So, tell us any of your thoughts on this or any of the past Better Podderings. You can email podcast@betterpodcasting.com or come to our Discord at betterpodcasting.com/Discord, or you can find that vehicle that SP just mentioned that he has, and you can write him a little note. Don't do that.
Yeah, it's protected by cameras, just to let you know.
Fair enough.
It's time to cast off the shackles of season 4 and shove off for our final podcast media host service review. And we're going to do Castos. We'll admit, when we were looking at media hosts to review in this season, neither of us had yet heard of Castos. So this is kind of new for both of us. But we took a quick look at it on paper and decided it was worth the time to give Castos a whirl. Now, according to the online company profiles, Castos was founded on May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, 2017, in the greater Chicago area by Craig Hewitt. Castos is still a private company today and is based either in Orlando, Florida, or Tinley Park, Illinois. The online company profile seems a little bit split on that, just pointing that out. I don't know what the veracity is. It seems like Illinois sounds like it's a better place just because that's where it was, but I don't know how Orlando got in there. Anyway,
let's call it Orlando, Illinois.
I prefer to call it Orlando, Florida, because I want to move to Florida. Anyway, Castos also boasts the Seriously Simple Podcasting WordPress plugin for those looking for a PowerPress alternative. And more on that later in the review. The Castos website currently lists a total of 9 team members as of this recording. Not going to go all over them, but they're 9. So that gives you a sense of how big the company actually is. Now, for this episode, I imported one of the 2 audio podcasts that pod faded after 2017 that the owner allowed to pod fade. And again, this is with his expressed permission that is written and on podcasts verbally. All right. This is not me stealing any shows. This is with permission. Now, I did import the show that was from Spreaker, and then I added a new episode to it to make sure that the feed was working, and it did. Now, Steven, you went ahead and you did something revolutionary. You actually created a new podcast.
Right. Yeah, I've not done that at all this season. Oh, wait. That's what I've done for every review this season, so why would I change anything for this last review? So went in there, decided to act like I was new, mostly because I couldn't remember how to podcast, and I created a brand new podcast, and both of us, as we went through there, were prompted to choose a tier that we wanted to choose, and we'll come back to the prices specifically in a minute, but we did choose the entry tier, which is $19 per month, called an Essential Plan, and we figured that was most reflective of what a hobby podcaster would likely choose. So for the final time in season 4 of Better Podcasting, let's continue our usual format that we've been following, which will be discussing the highlights, then the neutral points, and the shortcomings of Castos Podcast Media Host Service from the lens of a hobby podcaster. And I must throw this out there right now for those of you who are not watching on the video side. For I think all but 2 episodes of this season, SP, every time we have said lens of a hobby podcaster, he has held up a magnifying glass. So that's what you've been missing out on by not watching the video side of things.
It is a lens. I also have lenses in my glasses, but I figured, this would be more descriptive of what was going on. All right, highlights. First and foremost, there is a 301 redirect available in the distribution area of Castos. And then under a certain other category, right, Steven?
Oh, I was so excited because it was found under the danger zone. Yeah, we came across another danger zone, and I just love that. I sing it every time I read the term danger zone. So there's a check mark right there.
You got the Top Gun reference in there. You got the Archer reference to Top Gun in there. It's great. Danger Zone. Ironically, the learn more link there goes to a wrong URL. So, I mean, there's that too. But it is in there. It is in the dashboard, and I will probably be using it. Spoiler, after we get done with this review. Now, my import was pretty easy, actually. There are a few systems out there that I've used that you just actually type in the name of the podcast and it actually shows up your podcast. And because of, I think, that I have been moving the podcast from place to place to place, it actually showed 4 different feeds. This is the first time that's happened with this same podcast that I've been using. I don't know what's up with that. I am going to make sure I go back and delete all of the accounts and all the feeds that I've used for this. I did for the other show that I had used last week. So hopefully all the other feeds, even though I've used redirects along the way, are completely gone. But that was easy. I just went to the feed that had the most episodes in it, which was current. And then I just chose that. And then I had the ability just to bring it in. It was really easy. So, Stephen, you did not experience that at all because you had a new podcast, right?
No, it was pretty straightforward, though, to go through the setup and choose the options that were there. I will say that during the setup process, I found it pretty easy to understand. They had multiple steps in there, but the way they had it laid out as far as giving little nuggets of information as you went through, I think made a lot of sense for anybody who might not be that experienced with podcasting. So we'll come back and expand on that in a little bit, but for the setup process, it was pretty simple, even though they had, I think, 4 or 5 different steps to walk through. So
Yeah,
I'll throw that out there.
Probably about 7 steps for me too. There were no limitations with uploads or downloads that we can see in the amount of episodes or the size of the episode. And there is a big asterisk with that in one specific instance, which we'll come back to later. Castos does provide multiple RSS feeds per paid account. So we could have as many RSS feeds as we want to with the $19 a month Essentials plan. We can have as many episodes uploaded in that Essentials plan. So woohoo! Now, I will caveat this by saying we are fans of having some sort of limitation in there to protect the media host against abuse, but there were none of those really in here, because even with that exception, if you wanted to upload, I don't know, thousands of hours of podcasts in a week, you could do that on one account. And I think that's a little bit unfair, but it's what they have set up. So they meet this criteria based on what they have right now. So woohoo. Castos does support seasons, and how they do this is how a lot of other podcast media host providers do this. There's a GUID block with a episode season number that you can throw in there if you want to do seasons in your episode upload. So very simple. There's no way to go in and block seasons out in any other way. It's just per episode. That seems pretty standard there. So, Stephen, how was the experience with using the website?
I'll put this as a big highlight because so far in our experience, it felt very responsive for us. The uploads felt very fast, probably faster than most of the ones we've reviewed this season. The navigation of different pages were very quick to load. It didn't feel bloated. There also seemed like the download speeds were fairly fast for the files. And overall, just the experience with the speed of Castos was one of the faster ones that we've seen as a whole package. So kudos to them on that.
The dashboard itself was pretty fast and easy to understand. There was a lot of options available on different pages. So that might be a little detriment if you're unfamiliar with podcasting. But since we've used them quite a bit, we knew where to look for. And it felt like a very modern approach. They utilize the info icons to provide context to fields. This approach allows a new podcaster to learn what all these fields mean, but also not seem crowded by unnecessary text for those who are familiar already. So kudos for that, for trying to streamline the page. And overall, we would say it was one of the most modern, intuitive approaches that we've seen to a dashboard. It has a lot of features. The mobile dashboard as well was slightly different from the web version. It was the same features, but they used a drop-down menus instead of headers across the top. And it was largely the same. I didn't notice any differences between the two experiences.
Now, another highlight that was a bit of a surprise to both of us was when setting up the podcast, there was an option there. Instead, you could import, you could set up a new podcast, or you could integrate with the Seriously Simple Podcasting plugin to manage right from WordPress. So as you were setting up, if you chose this, it was going to walk you through, at least it looked like this, I didn't go through with it, creating an API key where then you would go into your WordPress, create the link there with the plugin, and then it looked like you were managing your podcast right from WordPress. So it was a third option in the setup, was to just get you over there right away, which I think was an interesting approach, and probably one that might make things a little easier for people who might be coming over from WordPress. But there was a limit that we want to call out if you are using that, because they did call out in their limitations that if you use this approach, there's an API limit where basically managing your podcast through the WordPress Seriously Simple Podcasting plugin is going to put an upload limit of 200 megabytes. So be aware of that. But you also need to be aware that depending on your WordPress configuration, you might actually have that a lot lower. So you got to have the right WordPress configuration if you want any meaningful use of this integration. And a lot of people do cheap out on their WordPress, so you might run into some issues there. So that's that caveat that we were mentioning for limits.
There is no limit to how many posts you can make, though. So you can have as many as you want, 200 megabyte episodes per day. So the help itself was easy to navigate and search. You're able to find answers to topics that we were looking for. I did this a couple of times. I know Steven did this a couple of times because we were back and forth on a couple of the features that we were curious about. And then, Steven, there was some automations into some other platforms.
Yeah, they had a little section there called automations, which talked about how you could work it into ConvertKit, into Stripe. And we'll come back with this because although that is an integration in there to another service, there's a reason behind that. And then they have listed that to come, you'll have an ability to have automations that work into Teachable. So that's teach:/able, and then Podia. So those two services as well. So it's nice to see this media host looking to see how you can integrate different things into different services. Into different services automatically. I think that makes things easier for the podcaster.
In this day and age of 2024, where transcripts were a new thing at the beginning of the year, it's hard to believe that in 2023 transcripts really weren't there, but in 2024 transcripts are there. They do provide, Castos does provide AI-powered automatic podcast transcripts included in your plan. Now, how many hours that you get to transcribe depend on what plan you are on within Castos. But Castos does offer entirely free podcast transcripts for every episode in 19 languages. There is an allowance of 10 episode credits per month in the Essentials plan, 25 episodes in the Growth plan, and 100 episodes per month in the Pro plan. Steven, you actually tried this.
Yeah, I went and I decided to give it a shot and see how it went. And so when I clicked the button, first off, I had to enable AI features, one of those agreement things you got to do. It's anything that's using anything, quote, AI these days, they're going to make you agree to it first. And then it told me that it would take roughly 15 to 30% of the file duration to get the transcription done. And I completely got distracted and forgot to actually time it. So couldn't tell you how long it actually took. But it was really easy just to go in and press generate transcript. And then in my actual episode that I did that, it populated the transcript and it's right there in amongst the rest of the episode details. And it, I didn't check it word for word, but it looked like it was pretty decent. And it said speaker A, speaker B, because I used an episode of Better Podcasting to upload, and it highlights that as it went through. And it looked like it was pretty decent overall. Yeah, I saw some errors, but what would you expect?
who did Castos say was speaker A?
Speaker A was actually, so this is interesting because it did get a little bit confused. I'm glad you asked that, because Speaker A actually was identified as, quote, "I'm Chris Farrell from the All Things Good and Dirty podcast." And then it went back and forth, and there was a Speaker C, but Speaker A came back in later in the episode, so clearly it wasn't Chris. So it does get a little confused in that. But hey, I guess it's transcripts.
That's hilarious. All right. Castos has all the key distribution directories that we're looking for. I'm not going to list them out, but it was actually pretty comprehensive. It was in 2 different blocks. There was like the big ones where it could help out, and there was like others. So it was pretty comprehensive. Kudos on Castos for that. The statistics are a pass for us. It was always a pass fail in the season. And it does have all the things that we're looking for to track growth, including downloads per episode, per apps that is consuming it, and the geographical. But of note, the advanced analytics needs to be a higher plan than the $19 essentials plan. So we didn't get to see everything that they were open to, but I believe that they have the quote unquote essentials, pun intended, for the analytics for a hobby podcasters. Now the file integrity, I'll have to say this with a caveat. I was a little bit off put originally, but we are giving it a pass. And then from Castos help page, see, we did actually use the help. It says, quote, "Does Castos alter the media files after upload?" No, we believe the file that you upload should be exactly the same file that your audience listens to. We don't modify the metadata, the bitrate, or file format of your podcast files when or after they're uploaded to our platform, unquote. However, like with some of the other podcast media host services we've discussed this season, we'd like to see that the file name remain unchanged. It's just in Stephen, I see this. I'm like, I can't identify what episode that is. Just a bunch of gobbledygook.
Yeah, and I remember back when we first got wind of Pinecast, this is way before this season, this is something that irritated us. But as we've gone through the media hosts, this seems like this is more than a few media hosts that are changing the file name. And it does aggravate us because it does make things a little harder to track. And if down the road you have to migrate, it makes it a lot harder to swap out the URL if you are doing something like putting a link to that file on your website independently. So it's the one fault that we have to give Castos here with file integrity. And just like with others like Pinecast, it's just a bit of a thorn in our side, but we have to give them a pass for the integrity because they don't modify the rest of the file.
The same 80 kilobit per second file that I uploaded was downloaded. And yes, again, I would not produce a file at 80 kilobits per second. That was the original producer of the podcast. No idea what he was thinking. All right. Castos does offer a healthy Podcast 2.0 namespace integration. Woohoo! With options like funding, value for value, the locked tag, and transcripts with WordPress Seriously Simple plugin.
And lastly, in our highlights, you can backdate a post if you want to. When I went in there and uploaded, it's the first thing I did. I went, I'm going to backdate, and I did successfully, very easily at that.
Yeah, and of course I have to backdate it because I'm trying to release the episode at the same time that it was originally released at. All right, moving on to the neutral zone. The $19 per month essential plans, and we told you we'd eventually get to it. It includes unlimited podcasts and episodes, unlimited downloads, up to 10 transcript credits per month, all stuff we have already talked about, in-depth listener analytics, automatic distribution to all podcast directories, up to 100, this is something new, up to 100 private subscribers. We haven't talked about that yet, but that's part of it. But here, you can't have a team account. You can't have an additional login until you up to the $49 a month plan. And there's no direct YouTube integration until you get to the $49 a month plan. So judging by all the other reviews that we've done, the cost points, what this actually offers, we're at a firm integer 2.5 out of 5 on affordability. That's a little math fun for you guys out there.
And also related to this, I'll call it out. The 14-day trial is there, but you got to do the credit card. So I'm sure, just like I think it was Captivate, I'll probably get burned in 15 days when I forget to delete the account.
Done that with 2 so far. I think Acast and I can't remember what the other one. It started with a T. Transistor.
Yeah.
It was the other one that I got burned on that. No problem. I paid him, but I also closed the account. So the website is fine. It's straddling the wall towards a highlight, but overall it's pretty rigid as far as options go, Stephen.
Hey, let's back that up again. Let's talk, because this is the provided website. Let's call that out as not their website. This
okay,
is
go ahead. Go single thing
okay,
and you take it.
Sure. All right. Just moving that down. Oops, what the hell did I do? Whatever. That's fine. Broke my dock.
Is it floating away?
Yes. Moving on, they do provide a website. So if you need a website for your podcast, you can get it through Castos. But we're going to call this a neutral, straddling the wall towards a highlight. Overall, yes, it's easy to set up, but it's pretty rigid on what you can do with it as far as options go to customize. It definitely falls more in the camp of offering a place on Castos for people to see your podcast versus some of the other media hosts where it feels more like a neutral website for your podcast. But there are 3 theme options available, which look good, and you can do a little bit of customizing for those 3 options in there, which is only adjusting the primary color as well as a couple of different fonts in there. So what you see is mostly what you get, just a couple of changes in there. It's definitely not in the area of being a shortcoming, but there is a good amount of room for improvement there with the provided website. And if you are looking for a download button on your provided website, it is there, but it's a little hard to find. So if someone's looking to download your podcast from the Castos website, they got to go to the player for the episode, then press the share button, then press the download button, and then they'll get your file. So if somebody's manually wanting to download it from the website, they just got to go a little hunting. We'd like to see that a little more obvious. But moving things back a little more towards the positive as well, you can do a custom domain with the website. They make that very apparent when you set up the website, and they link to a help article of how you can use a custom domain for your podcast website on Castos.
Along the lines of monetization, which is a criteria that we threw in, but we're not looking to monetize our shows, there is an ads program available if you're into that. There's also private subscribers available at the different plans. The 3 plans are $19 a month, $49 a month, and $99 a month. At the $19 a month, there's 100 subscribers, as we mentioned before, 250 at the $49 a month plan, and at the $99 a month plan, it's 500 subscribers. So that's your limit there. You have an upward limit of 500 subscribers, and you'll have to pay more for more private subscribers. So that's kind of what pushes this into the neutral, because that's just a lot of money that you have to pay for 500 people. But also you have to integrate with a third-party service, which is Stripe.
And that's what we wanted to call out. So we can see why the integration is in there, because they've clearly built a system around private subscribers that use a third-party service, Stripe. So it kind of makes sense that that integration would be in there to that third-party service. So that's what we wanted to call out earlier in the episode. Of course, all of this if you're into monetization.
Now, definitely Waffles will be interested into this. The embed player looks fine, but unfortunately it's not customizable. So what you see is what you get. And then one weird one that we'll put into the neutrals was an area of curiosity to us. Curious because we couldn't find anything more about it. There was a country of origin option. I saw this originally and I was like, what? And then I kind of skipped over it. It was like, okay, I'll deal with that later. So, quote, here's the description, quote, invite global audiences to listen to your podcast by leaving these blank, or reach audiences in specific countries and territories by prioritizing them here, unquote. And there are 3 country prioritization drop down. Stephen, this is a little bit confusing to me, because once it's out there, it should be out there worldwide unless you're blocked somewhere.
Yeah, I was really confused, and I tried searching the help, and I couldn't find anything else about this. So I'd like to know a little bit more. And at first I thought, okay, well, maybe they're geo-blocking. Maybe you can say, I only want this to go to Canada. But then I reread that, and it says prioritizing them. So it doesn't say limiting. So I don't know. Maybe somebody knows more about this, but that's why we're putting it in the neutral. It's an option that we haven't seen yet.
All right, moving on to the shortcomings. There's no team logins at the $19 a month plan. As we mentioned before, you have to go to $49 and higher. So we're going to list that as a shortcoming. The video features are on the paid plans, so you have to go higher as well for that. $49 a month for YouTube integration, and also $99 a month required for video subscribers. So you can have video subscribers, but it's going to cost you $99 per month. And with YouTube out there and with YouTube membership, I'm scratching my head. Maybe you don't like Google, so maybe you want to do something like this, but I think you're shortening your reach by not doing YouTube. I'm not a YouTube fan per se. I'm just saying that is where the audience is. So I don't know why you wouldn't want to do that. Anyway, if you're trying to grow private subscribers, you need to increase the plan. We talked about this at length a couple of times already, but we're going to list that as a shortcoming. And then something that we've given up the ghost on so far, really, because it doesn't exist anymore. There is no social media auto posting with Castos or anybody else. So that's definitely a shortcoming here. There are fields for social media accounts in the host profiles, and you can do social media profile links as well. So that is in the host profiles, but it's not in the main show.
No, and also for Castos, there's no all-in-one solution, but they do have some links and integrations to Riverside, so it looks like Riverside is cleaning up across a bunch of these media hosts. And if you're somebody who knows you're going to forget your ID3 tags, well, guess what? You are going to just have to be okay with that because there's no ID3 tag management or identification on Castos, so it might as well be like they don't exist to Castos.
There's no ability to return an episode back to draft, or at least not that I found. You can delete an episode, but you can't return it back to draft. And I think I'm just speculating here. This might have something to do with Podcasting 2.0 integration. We've talked about it before, that it might have something to do with the monetization. I don't know, but I need the ability to return an episode back to draft for a variety of different reasons. And it's not available with Castos. So that's definitely in the shortcoming for me.
Once again, Kurt Russell would be very disappointed.
And then dynamic audio insertion is not there. There is add dynamic insertion, but not dynamic audio insertion. So this is your ability to put whatever audio that you want, say it's an announcement, into your episodes that you want to change week to week and will go into your back episodes. There's just not available within Castos. So that's definitely a shortcoming. And even though we don't use it, I mean, Stephen, throughout this season, I think you see the benefit of having dynamic audio insertion in your show.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of ways, if we had had that the whole run of Better Podcasting, we would be using it to date. I agree.
All right.
In summary, Castos was intriguing enough for us to extend our season 4 episode by yet another episode. We wanted to make sure we got this done once we got wind of Castos, and Castos does indeed have some key criteria we were looking for, such as the ability to have multiple feeds per account, unlimited uploads or downloads, a modern responsive dashboard, even a WordPress plugin that integrates quite well that isn't PowerPress, file integrity, of course, minus the episode name, and it looked like Podcasting 2.0 was being embraced. However, Castos doesn't pass some other key areas that we were looking at.
There is no team logins at the $19 a month Essentials plan. I'll just foot stomp this. There you go, Stephen. There you can take a drink. You were looking for that. That in a hobby podcast team, it is essential, pun intended again, for your team to have access to your account. If you're going to podcast with 2, 3, 4 people, it is paramount for them all to have access to the actual feed and to be able to drop an episode or change something or do some maintenance behind the scene. So yeah, that's a fail, and that's a big fail for me. There's no dynamic audio insertion. We just talked about that, and no ability to return an episode back to draft mode. That's back to draft mode, not backdraft. Back to draft mode, which is definitely a thing that I have done in the past, and I want to continue to do that. I'll just give you an example. Buzzsprout does the whole Snapcast thing, and then the whole intent behind the Snapcast is you give your listeners something for a week, and then when you actually drop your real episode the next week, you just remove that. It's not part of your feed, but you don't want it to go away and the stats to go away, so you don't delete it. You just return it back to draft mode. So yeah, they don't have that, and I've done it for other reasons as well, so I need that. So we will not be carrying Castos with us into our final short list. We are looking forward to Castos' future improvements and updates. We will be keeping Castos on our watch list for now. It's just not on our short list. But based on your needs, it might work for you, which is why we did this review, especially if you're looking for coupling your WordPress site or looking for a very quick and responsive experience. Subjectively, it felt like one of the quicker, responsive platforms that we've tested all season.
And in full transparency, I do want to acknowledge right now that Castos not being on the short list, I think, suffers a little bit about being at the end of the season. Had we reviewed them earlier on without seeing all the other ones, maybe they would have hung on that short list for a little bit longer because there was a lot of pros in there. But knowing what we have on our short list now and what it's compared to, it's not finding its way on there. So, you know, your mileage may vary. I'll just throw that out there as a disclaimer before someone says, gotcha.
Fair enough.
This is where we here at Better Podcasting turn the show over to you as we run through some of your feedback. We call this segment Better Podback.
All right, Better Podback. This is the show, the episode. All right, Better Podback. And let's start off with some Better Podback that's going to dig into the history of Better Podcasting, because way back in the day, we talked a lot about the Zoom L12. I used that for a solid while, had lots of favorable things, except for some reason I could clip it all the time by saying the word hack. Could always do that. But anyways, the Zoom L12 was something we talked about, and Damien the DM uses a Zoom L12, and he said, did you know the L12 has a max file size per track? Because yeah, I found that out this weekend, 1.99 gigabytes, to which Yakko came in and said, probably a file system limitation on the memory card. And Damien said it takes about 6 hours for our single wave files to split, because once they reach that, they do split off. Now, here's the context of all of that is that, and I believe Yakko was right about this, is that within file system limitations, and I believe that is the file system that the SD card is formatted to, the maximum file size is 2 gigabytes. And we see a lot of this happen with different devices and polywave files. SP actually brought this up in the Discord, and why that happens. For example, I'm using the Rodecaster Pro. Every time we record this episode, it has split the file into multiple tracks. And that's because the way a polywave works is there's a whole bunch of individual tracks within one file. So with the Rodecaster Pro, you've got, let's call it 10 tracks when you include stereo. Somewhere is in there. I don't remember. It's somewhere in there. But you have basically so many tracks recording into a single file. So that 2 gigabytes ends up being reached quicker than if you had one file per track, which is how the Zoom L12 works. So if you have 12 tracks on the Zoom L12, which it's actually more than that, I think it's 14 because you have the mix down, but let's say 14. So you got 14 tracks, you got 14 independent wave files in there, meaning that you're reaching that maximum, that 2 gigabytes, a lot longer as far as time goes because it's only recording one track to the file. So this, I believe, is a file limitation thing, and Damien did say that it did split off just like a Polywave does, is it splits off. So there you go. If you're running yourself a 6+ hour recording, you might run into this issue if you are not using Polywave files.
Yeah, I don't have Polywave on the Rodecaster Pro 2. It's one of the benefits, of having a Rodecaster Pro 2. And I'm glad, because I don't ever want to deal with a Polywave file. So,
but don't run longer than 6 hours, or you'll probably experience the same thing.
I can go. It says I have more than 12 hours available. So
yeah, but it'll split your file just like a Polywave, and then you'll be feeling the pain that I do every week.
Yeah, okay, let's not do that. Cut it off. 6 hours. That's it. All right, moving on to the next comment. Damien the DM said there's a Spotify for Podcasters app now instead of trying to find your way to your show online. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that, DM. But I haven't had a chance to look into this. Steven, did you?
No, but I thought that was maybe going to be a little clearer for some podcasters, because what came to my mind with this was when we did Spotify for Podcasters, how confusing it was to create an account or log into account because of the fact that there was multiple different services under the portal there. Because there was the traditional Spotify for Podcasters, there was the Anchor, there was something else.
Yes,
and so
yes.
Maybe this app would make it easier for people, maybe?
Well, I wish you a lot of luck. And Spotify for Podcasters surprisingly made its way onto our short list. So we'll have to consider that as we move forward. Our friend Chris Farrell uses it. We don't. But yeah, they're a big player in podcasting. As much as it might pain me to say, I don't think it pains me to say anymore. I think they've proven their worth. I think they are a little bit non-podcasty because their tendency for a closed ecosystem, but that failed for them. So maybe they're embracing the open ecosystem. I don't know. We'll see where it goes in the future. An app might actually help things though, because that was incredibly difficult. And I think Anchor.fm is gone now. I want to say in the United States. I think everybody was transitioned this summer, and that was the whole Riverside thing, because their tools went away and they've thrown everybody to Riverside.
The last piece of Better Podback we have this week was from Randy Walker, and this was about the Captivate. He posted the link in there to the Captivate 2.5, and he said, anything about this change your Captivate ratings? And basically, from what we've seen, as we mentioned, I don't think it would change our overall feeling of where we landed on Captivate. Yes, it might change some feedback we would have in there, because I'm sure some of the things they've changed would maybe be different than the way we reviewed it. But I wanted to bring this up because, first off, thank you for linking that, Randy. Secondly, this is something that we can anticipate going forward, that there will be changes to these media hosts, and we're just going to call it as it is. This is the season of media host reviews, and after this season, unless it's something monumental, it's very unlikely we'll be giving you updates of each media host we've reviewed. We've been keeping extra tabs on it, or extra focus on these media hosts for this season, but going forward, unless it's something major, it'll just be something that would talked about in the news section. And so our reviews are definitely a snapshot at the time of review. So when you are exploring a media host, I would encourage you to look at it at that point, because our review should give you a running start, but maybe something will have changed in the future.
I'd even go as far as to say our criteria might change over time, pending new developments in the infrastructure of podcasting.
For sure. And if you are anybody who likes to talk about media hosts, come to our Discord, because there's lots of people in there who do like to talk about media hosts. And even if it doesn't find its way into our news in a future season of Better Podcasting, we still would like to chat. We still would like to chat about it in our Discord, and others would too.
Indeed. Well, Stephen, that about wraps it up for our Season 4 reviews of Podcast Media Host Services and this episode of Better Podcasting. I'm looking forward to our next episode, where we're just going to bring it all together and remind everybody what's on our short list. And we will be giving our decisions and our recommendations going forward. So just because we've decided on something doesn't mean something else might not work for you individually.
And the other thing that I'd like to mention as well is that we are hobby podcasts. So when we talk about where the future of our podcast might be, you need to remember we're hobby podcasters. So if you are somebody that is monetizing, your priorities might be a little bit different than ours.
Absolutely. So for episode 302 of Better Podcasting, I'm the better one, SP.
And I'm Steven saying we did it backwards today. That's fine.
See everybody next time. Have happy podcasting with your hobby podcast.
Bye. I think it's going to be a little bit here because I didn't push the button.
Oh, no problem.
Thanks for checking out another episode of Better Podcasting. You can find the full back catalog of Better Podcasting at betterpodcasting.com. If you're into geeky podcasts, please check out the other podcasts on the Gonna Geek Network at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. This show was produced and edited by Stephen Jondrew. Voice work was done by L.W. Salinas. Thanks again for listening or watching, and we hope to see you again next week.
Damien says that he didn't the spoiler didn't go the way he expected. I assume he was thinking we were going to wholeheartedly recommend Castos, or we decided. I don't know. I'm confused.
No, so at the beginning of the review, I said that I will be removing my show from Castos.
Oh,
He might have taken that like to the extreme or something like that. Yeah, I'm not going to be recommending Castos to hobby podcasters. It might work for you individually. I could see a case where you are a solo podcaster because you don't have a team. You don't need team accounts. You're a solo podcaster and you're daily podcasting for like 5 shows, right?
yeah.
This would make sense for that. I don't know if I would put myself through that, but this would make sense for that. This media host provider service would make sense for that. So I'm not going to say a definite no, but it's not going to be our recommendation because I don't see that use case for a hobby podcaster. Once again,
I would say though at the beginning of the season, teams was less of a priority for us. I think as we were gauging everything,
it was always a priority for me.
it was. But Podbean's on the list, and I don't think they have.
Podbean's on the list,
But but it's an elevated price point for teams, isn't it?
I don't know if there is teams on Podbean. I'll have to go back and take a look at that.
That's why I thought it was, because
So
Podbean came to my mind with teams.
The other issue with Podbean is the website is leaps and bounds above the website for Castos.
Right.
The individual show. So between the two, I'd go Podbean. But Podbean is only one show. If you wanted to go multiple shows, there are other options out there that I think are better.
Yeah. Hey everybody. Good question by Johnny. We will be next week. Next week it will be the last of the season, and then we will be taking August and part of September off.
It is next week. It's not
yeah.
in 2 weeks.
No, it's
Okay.
next week. I'm looking at Podbean. It looks like Admins is up on the $79 tier.
Okay.
You got the network.
Yeah, I don't think that's realizable for a hobby podcast.
No, and that's why I thought it was. I think I don't know. I'm pretty certain myself that our priorities evolved as we went through. I think as we started to see
Maybe.
more, I think that it shifted a little bit. Maybe how we gauge things. I think if we were to objectively go back and listen, but overall we were still checking our criteria week to week in an actual table. So
there's no way to return a show to draft. That's an issue.
Yeah.
There's no dynamic audio insertion. So, which I don't know if there is with Podbean either. So yeah, I'll have to take a firmer look at Podbean before we go further. I mean, I know what my 3 recommendations are going to be, and we haven't talked about it between the two of us. By the way, if you're listening to us right now, I know what my 3 recommendations are going to be, and they're for very specific instances, but they should cover the breadth of hobby podcasting as I see it. So there's that. So there's not one option out there. There's several on our short list, but there will be recommendations that we make. So it's not just going to be one, but we will tell you where we've decided to park our shows, at least for now.
Yeah, and the other thing, assuming I remember to put it in there, I think we'll probably call out in our episode, we haven't done the documenting yet for it, but I think we might even call out some things that we, after going through this, we feel are indicators of being more modern approach to media hosting versus past. Like, I think it's become clear there's a few features that indicate that the provider is thinking in the here and now, as opposed to those features being missing and being stuck in the past.
I think it's very equivalent to in 2017 when Apple Podcasts rolled out the new tags.
Yeah.
And there were those people that did the tags and those people that didn't. Similarly with stats, there were those that did and those that didn't. There were some people that didn't do the stats for a reason, and they enunciated those reasons. But there were some like SoundCloud that just said, we don't know what podcast hosting is like.
Well, thanks everybody for coming on by. We hope you had yourself a fun time. We'll be back next week. I'm going to just confess I talked softer this time because I'm feeling the smoke in my throat. So I guess...
Is that... I haven't heard you've had forest fires.
There's a forest fire not terribly far from me. Not anything I got to worry about right now, but it's over the city.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just
good luck with that.
hovering. The first couple days I was escaped in my area, but then like last night it rolled in all over the place. So
do you have an orange haze at night?
Yeah. Well,
okay.
I will
Well, good luck.
I will anticipate because this morning there was an orange haze as I got up. So
Okay.
where I was last night there was not, but I will anticipate that. Okay, thanks everybody. Have a good night.
Yep. Bye.